Yeah, I know, right?
Allergic reaction.
Is everybody ready? Yeah, well, tonight anyway, we'll see. I'm ready. Okay, guys, this is the best backup class ever, number 2. And I have to say it like that, it gives me the giggles. All right, tonight, hopefully, we're going to be talking about tuning backups. And we're going to go quite a bit deeper into the process than we did last time. I'm going to show you guys quite a few trace flags that you can use in your efforts. And hopefully some that you can't as well. We'll do just for GPs. I don't even think there's a mic up here. You guys tell me if I'm not being heard, and I'll speak up a little bit. What was that? So when I was putting this together this morning, I had just tons of ideas on what I could do, and I initially started going down the road of showing you guys all the math behind all of this stuff and how everything works in the background. But that's really kind of a vain exercise. I decided. I figured it was best to show you practical application and something that you're actually going to be able to use in your job, rather than just showing you vague, like, backup and restore mining theory, right? So instead, we're going to concentrate on the real nuts and bolts of how to do this, so that you can go back to work and just start hammering that stuff out. That was supposed to be louder. So there's nothing really that tells you on this system, this backup will perform this way, this restore will perform that way. Nothing at all. But what you do get is, after doing this just a few times, you start to get a feel for it, right? You start to see that, well, okay, so I've got a database that's a terabyte and it's taken 4.5 hours to back up. From my previous experience, there's something really wrong with that, right? I had a call from... I thought that was your phone. I was like, turn off your phone! I had a call from one of my previous junior DBAs at my last company just a couple weeks ago. They had another backup situation where they had a 2 terabyte backup that was taking 7 hours. And I said, well, I don't know what it should be, but it shouldn't be that, right? So after a while, you just start to develop a feel for it. So I figured, what's the best way to start a backup class like this? Then let's diagnose a long-running restore. Okay? That's a really good place to do this. This is what I've been waiting on. I got a 16.5-minute restore here of AdventureWorks. AdventureWorks is only a few megs. Okay? So even on my box, that's a little ridiculous, right? Since it backs up in about 20 to 40 seconds, depending on what else is going on in the box. Okay? So we've got here our simple backup line right there. Restore database AdventureWorks from a single file with 50 buffers. Let's hear what you guys think first. Where would we start looking at why this thing took 16.5 minutes to restore? No takers at all? Okay.
Say speed between the backup file and the server, the stored offsite.
Okay. Well, right now we know this one's local, so let's work on this one. Buffer count. It could be. We're going to say that this buffer count is just fine, because 50 buffers, 16 minutes. From a 30-second backup to a 16.5 minute, that's a very big difference in buffers, right? And by the way, the default on this is 7 for a single backup file. So we have increased the buffers just fine.
Fragmented?
That's a good one. Fragmentation, disk fragmentation. Yeah, that could do it. That could add some time, but I doubt it's going to add that much time. So the point is, we have no idea, right? And this is quite often what you face when you do stuff like this, is you have no idea what the problem is, where the problem came from. So you need to know what backup and restore is doing under the covers so that you can tell where the bulk of the time is being spent, right? That's a fair assessment. So you notice here I've turned on a number of trace flags. 3605 sends the output to the log. 3004 is the one we're interested in right now. Okay? That gives you a list of the internal backup operations, of some of the internal backup operations that SQL is performing. So if we go to the log, there's a log in here somewhere. Nobody tweet that.
I laugh. Do I get a book?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right. Full suck up is in effect. I've got lots of swag up here.
I love your hair.
So did the database exist before you restored?
No, and that's a good question.
It's troubling me because it says it processed X pages in 16 or 36 seconds, but yet it took 16 minutes. So
Right. So if we get into here, what we're going to see here, let me bring this over here. And some of you guys are going to get this right away. We started off right here with zeroing the log file, and then zeroing. There's the log file too. Where's my? Dun, 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 dun. It's a little bit more. LDF. There.
You don't have file, use that file initialization turned on.
Let's restore it.
Probably have
It's okay.
fake the
I'm sorry?
you fake the log, the size. It's explode from the size of either the log or data file.
Okay, so I'm missing something in here, but that's okay. Forget the fact that I ran this 5 times. What?
It's not earlier?
No, it should have been right up in here. Because I don't even see it. But well, maybe it is.
There it is.
Yeah, there it is. Sorry. It is. I just messed that up. Here it is, right here. So we've got here zeroing. That's it right there. The data file and zeroing the log file. So I think it was Ryan that said that we didn't have instant file initialization turned on. I'm going to have to start calling that IFI because I can never say that whole thing. So everybody here knows what IFI is, right? Whenever you create a database, whenever you expand a file, by default, it's going to zero that out. Okay? So if you've got a 10 gig file that you create and it's only got 2 megs worth of stuff in it, you're going to have the rest of it filled with zeros. It's like the difference between car and var car, right?
Sorry, stupid question. Is it literally filled with zeros?
Yes.
Okay. Making sure that's
It's literally filled with zeros. So
When it says zeroing out of files, it literally means it's filling up the disk space with zeros.
yes, it is literally filling it with zeros. So what we've got here is we've got a data file that has a lot of empty space in it. I orchestrated this, right? But that's not very far outside of the realm of possibility, right? To have a huge data file that's mostly empty because it just expanded. Maybe you expand it, 20, 30, 50 gigs at a time. You go to restore, and now you got to do all that zeroing out, right? The point here is, if we didn't know what was going on under the covers, and see, here we got the time, right? At 6 o'clock to 6:15, it was zeroing that file. If you had IFI turned on, you would only see the zeroing of the log file. Unfortunately, you can't do anything about that. The log file will always zero out no matter what you do. That's just the way the log file has to work. So by using trace flag 3004, we can see where the backup is spending its time. And if you want to see if your database has, if your server has IFI turned on, just create a simple little database with this trace flag and go look at, with these 2 trace flags, and go look in the log. And if you see the data file being zeroed out, then you know you don't have it turned on. So,
Big option you can check.
But Sean, how do I turn it on?
The question was, but Sean, how do I turn it on? No, it's not a config option you check. SQL will automatically use IFI if the service account has perform volume maintenance tasks permission. And it only checks it on startup. It doesn't check it for every operation. So if you go give the service account that permission, perform volume maintenance tasks, it's under local security, under admin tasks, and it's user rights assignment, and you'll see it in there.
Yeah, so it's not a SQL option. It's
Right.
an OS option.
Right, it's an OS option.
Which can be set up in group policy, by the way.
And SQL will only use that, will only check that when it's first turned on. There's no way to turn it on from within SQL, but there is a way to turn it off temporarily. And that's where TraceFlag 1806 comes in. So I turned off IFI so that I could orchestrate this little troubleshooting scenario, right? And it'll be turned off as long as I've got this turned on, right? So imagine the havoc you could wreak on a system by going in there and turning on 1806, -1 for an hour, right? You could be a performance tuning god. People call you. You automatically solve these problems, right? And it's really hard to track that down too. I mean, not only does nobody know what 1806 does, it'll be in the log that it was turned on. Not only does nobody know what 1806 does, they just blow right by it because, I mean, it's a trace file, right? So, and this is a very hard thing to track down. And I believe I've just given you something to destroy your environment with. But no, so 3004 gives you the ability to see what SQL is doing with its I/O in the log so that you can at least check that one off your list. Fair enough? Now we're going to go back and do that one the right way. We're going to drop the database again. Now it only works if the database is dropped. If the files are already there and it's just overwriting them, there's nothing left to zero out. So it does a regular restore, right? Notice I'm turning TraceFlag 1806 back off now, so I get my IFI back. And it should come, in about 20 or 30 seconds. That's what she said. Okay, while we're waiting, does anybody want to suck up for a book?
That's what she said.
How's power shut with your wife?
That's not sucking up.
No, I really just want to know.
Oh, okay.
Seriously, good time.
These are really wonderful ideas.
Okay, thanks.
So, who said that? Wonderful ideas? Oh. I'll start laying books out in case somebody gets lucky.
That's what she
Yeah,
said.
that's what
Here to go.
There we go. And 34 seconds. There's a big difference. So you see what we've already been able to do just in the first few minutes of class to vastly improve the performance. And I've got, these are the Transcender stuff again, a study guide and a free exam voucher. So, I've been in plenty of positions where doing stuff like this has made all the difference in the world. My last gig was like that. Actually, my current gig was like that. Before I started tuning the backups at my current gig, they had a 500 gig database that took 6 to 7 hours to restore on tier 1 storage on a SAN. What are you doing, right? They were doing everything wrong. Default parameters everywhere, single backup file, IFI wasn't turned on, 70 gigs of free space. It was all over the board, just absolutely everything was done wrong that could be done wrong. So, moving right along. Let's see if I had anything else to say about IFI.
You just need to take and grant your service account that perform volume maintenance task,
Yes, and then burp SQL.
and then what?
And then burp SQL.
Okay. That's what I thought you said.
Yes.
Might be for speakers there, but it should be better than nothing.
Is this? Nope. How about now? How about now? How about now? Ah, there we go. You just got to play with it a little bit first.
You're not hanging out for that's what she said?
Oh, do y'all want to make this a that what she said night?
Well, that's what she says all the time.
Okay, for those of you on the recording, I'm being forced to put on a mic. So, alrighty, I'm going to go ahead and turn off all trace flags. Okay, moving right along. So, okay, good. Now we're going to play with some trace flags. We're going to look at 3004 again. I'm going to turn that back on. And let's do a backup database. Notice how now I'm using 3604 to push it to the client instead of to the log. And we're going to get drastically different information. Okay? F5. That'll only take a few seconds, like, I don't know, 20, 30 seconds. So, how long do you want to wait? This is weird now, because now I hear this like godly thing going through there, and it's... Yeah, my voice is godly. You got a problem? Okay, so 3004. The only reason I'm showing you this, because it's not really going to give you anything super useful as far as tuning your backups, but there is some pretty handy information in here, and it shows you the steps that backup goes through just to kind of validate for you some things that happen, right? You see here the checkpoint gets done, right? Clearing differential bitmaps, right? That's an important one, as we're hopefully going to see in a later class. Only full backups clear the DCM, the differential change map, okay? That's why the differentials only go back to the last full backup, because every full backup clears the DCM, and you can see it right there. You do a checkpoint, you got all of these types of operations in here. Not going to read all of them. So on, so on, so on. Trailing config, and finally finished. So that just 3004 acts completely differently in here than it does in the log. So just so that you can see that that if you ever wonder anything about backup, what types of operations it does, turn on 3004 and just sit there and watch it. You'll get some good information out of it. Now you get, oh yeah, and you get completely different information from 3004 when you do a restore. In retrospect, it probably would have been a good idea to do a bunch of these ahead of time and store the results and just talk you through them instead of waiting for them to happen every time. But then you might not have believed me that it actually did it.
Why wouldn't we believe you?
I just got a salesman's face. Okay, that's worth a book. Really? You don't want it? Oh, it was you. Okay, well, come on. I don't know. I was looking at you. I thought you did it. How you doing, dude?
Hey, look at that.
Ah, there we go. So now you see completely different information. A lot of planning, right? Preparing containers, restoring the backup set, then eventually you'll come down here and see transitioning it online, starting it online. You get to see all the rolling forward and restore redo. You get to see all that stuff. So if you wonder what the steps are to restoring, then you can come in here with 3004 and you can see what the steps are to restoring. Let's turn these trace flags off. And now let's turn on 3213, which will give us some good buffer info.
So this is all basically the same command over and over and over again. You're just showing us.
I'm just showing you the effect of the different trace flags.
Okay.
Now this one, you probably also won't get tons of stuff unless you get really good with the internals, right? You probably won't get tons of stuff out of this as far as tuning a backup. but it's good to know this information is here, and there is a lot of good deep information. Maybe we'll go over some of it at a later date. But you see, this is the one that we did last time. The file system alignment. That one can be interesting. I wish we had time to go into that. Maybe I'll do a thing on it, but it has to do with the drive sector alignment on your drives and your SANs, right? But this here is giving your alignment, so that that's one way to know if you've got good alignment on your arrays.
Well, don't most SAN engineers know that now, and they kind of go in and align them?
The question is, don't most SAN engineers know that, and they go and they align the partitions now, right?
Yes. Am I just wishing?
I'm not going to comment on what SAN admins may or may not know. I can only comment on the ones I've dealt with, and I'll say don't take that as a given. I'm really surprised the number of highly qualified disk people that don't know partition alignment. Server 08 handles that for you now, but even if you take an array and unplug it from an 03 machine and put it in an 08 machine, it's not going to realign the partitions. I mean, you're already malaligned, right? You got to build them from scratch under 08. So, even if you're on an 08 box and you've got a SAN admin or you've got a good server admin, a good disk admin, don't take it for granted that those disks weren't just taken out of another box and plugged in there, right? I mean, you have no idea. Maybe this guy was brought in to replace somebody incompetent, and he had no idea because he's got 3,000 boxes to take care of, right? So yeah, don't just assume that they're aligned because you have a SAN guy on staff.
We don't have the same guys.
I'm just saying. So this is the one I showed you last month. You can see the buffers. The most important things out of here are going to be buffer count, max transfer size. Right? That is the most important thing. And probably buffer space. You can see your buffer space there. We'll talk more about how that gets calculated later. We're not going to look at the same thing for the restore. 3001. I like this one.
Turn off your 23.
Oh, yeah.
13.
I'm not going to run this one because I'm already feeling a time crunch, just a little bit. But 3001 will keep your backups from being logged into the MSDB tables. And I already see the look on your face. Why would I want to do that, right? Well, what if you're using a third-party solution that logs its own information and you don't necessarily want to double up on it? Right? What if you're using VDI or Snapshot or something? You just don't want to fill up MSDB with that kind of stuff because you've got a third-party product that does it all for you. What if you just don't care? You just don't want MSDB to get too big. So those are the only reasons I can think of. For the most part, you don't care. If you don't care about it, let it write it anyway, and then just set the retention to something ridiculous like a day or something, so it's always just killing everything off, right? But nonetheless, it's there, and you can turn it off if you want. So I'm not going to run that one either. 3014 gives you a lot of deep level info. I'm going to go ahead and run this one. And there was one more that I don't think I've got up to yet. So we'll talk about it while we're doing that one. It is 3226. Trace flag 3226. What that does is that keeps it from writing log backup information to the SQL log. And that actually can be kind of handy. Sure, quite often you want to know about the log backups, right? But not necessarily in the log. I mean, by default at my company, I back up the log every 15 minutes. That fills up the log. I mean, there's a lot of crap to drudge through every time I go to look through the SQL error log. I have to filter out my log backups, right? So if you use 3226, you can turn that off. Still go into the history tables. If you want to find out the last log backup, just go query the history tables, right? Or use PowerShell and just query the database directly for the last log backup date. Last log backup date time, right? But it doesn't have to go on the log. That kind of stuff is put in the log for, I'm convinced, for those third-party monitoring tools like OpenView and whatnot that want to go in there, and because most of those things don't use SQL methods to do their job, they just mine the logs and the event logs for things, right? They mine the SQL logs and the event logs for things. So to be really effective with job failures and whatnot, you have to force the jobs to log their stuff to the event log or something like that a lot of times if you want to get things like OpenView and Tivoli and those guys reporting on it regularly. So
So if you want a torpedo that's Tivoli set up, now know how.
Sure. Well, it depends on how they've got it set up, right? But I believe that was one of them that just mines. What's the one the one I'm forced to use at work? Patrol. If it doesn't go on the NT log, it's just, or the SQL log, you just don't get it. So okay, you can see here not a ton of information from 3014, but a little bit, right? You can see at least what it was expected. Whether you can see the diff map, you can see different little tiny stuff in here, right? The backup family. Nothing tons useful, but I wanted to give you guys a handful of trace flags so that you can do with them what you want, right? Run some backups, do what you need.
Now, there's no penalty really to turning these trace flags on and off because it's still doing that work anyway.
Yeah, it's just showing it to you.
Tell you about it.
Yeah.
Repeat that for the recording.
The question was, is there any penalty to turning these trace flags on and off? The answer is no. If you leave 3004 on with a combination of 3605 and -1, if you leave that on, you're going to have a lot more activity in your log than you need. So you could fill up your log a lot more. But other than that, it's not that big a deal. Okay, so as I said last month, probably one of the biggest bangs for your buck when tuning your backups is going to be turning on compression. And I realize that we all have tons of different versions. I've still got a 6.5 box lying around. We've all got different versions. We all don't have the luxury of turning on backup compression, or we're on my standard RTM, so we can't have backup compression and standard until R2. I realize all that, but that doesn't negate the fact that if you've got it, use it. If you don't have it, get something like Lightspeed or Redgate or backup or Hyperback, which is Redgate now also, right? Hyperback's my current favorite, by the way. But get something like that and compress those other backups. You can do nothing better for your environment than compressing your backups. Not only are you writing less to the disk, right? You've got a lot less I/O going onto the disk, but disk is far more expensive than anything else. And even though it's cheap, it's still far more expensive than anything else, right? So by doing that, you can take a backup directory down. For an enterprise, you can take a backup directory down from 9 to 12 terabytes for all of your boxes if you're centralizing your backups, right? Down to just 1 or 2. I mean, it's amazing the difference. Now, somebody brought up last time, Sal, that when SQL compresses its backup, it writes the file and then it compresses it, right? That's not exactly what happens, okay? Because that wouldn't really be a savings at all, would it? Because you'd still have to have that disk. So the way that works is when they first started it, when they first started with backup compression, the way it worked was they created a file the size of the full backup, okay? The size of the database. And especially over the network, that took quite a bit of time. It took the backup from, say, 30 minutes, like 2.5 hours. I mean, it was an incredible difference, right? So now what they do is they create a backup file that's about 1/3 of the compressed size, 1/3 of the database, and then they write the compressed backup files to it, and then they shrink the file back down if they need to, or grow it if they need to. But it's not writing an uncompressed backup and then compressing it. It's just creating a file of a certain size, and then it's writing compressed data to it, and then either truncating or growing as they need to. Okay, so that's how backup works, or that's how backup compression works. They're not actually expecting you to have that full size and then shrinking it back down, and that's not the first time I've heard that. Cool. Alrighty. Now, if you're going to compress your backups, you want to know how much bang you're getting for your buck. So there's this query here that I pulled off the internet, and then I altered just a little bit that I can get here, and I can see all of the backups that I've done. Well, I'll just move this instead. What the uncompressed size was, what the compressed size, and it's got a compression ratio here. The higher the ratio, the better the backup. 1 is 1 to 1. This is 4.9 to 1. That's actually pretty good, and I've added a little percentage here so you can see what percentage that is, right? So I got 0% on these last ones because they weren't compressed, and I'm getting about 80% on my AdventureWorks. Not too shabby, right? Okay, good. So let's talk about tuning a backup from scratch, because this is what you all came to see anyway. We talked about the null backup device last month. I keep wanting to say last week, so if I slip. So the null backup device is it's an operating system device that when you write to it, it just throws the I/O away. It just doesn't make a write, but it goes through all of the we'll say pomp and circumstance of doing the write. It even sends back to SQL that it did the write. So as far as SQL knows, that data is sitting safely on a magnet somewhere, but it's just not. Okay, the OS just throws it away. And as I discovered last week, somebody came up and asked me afterwards, you can actually use 2 L's on there as well. I've only ever used 1. They said, well, you can use 2 L's. I said, really, can you? We tested it, so you can. So there you go. So what this is going to do in this situation, and this is where you always want to start. This is where I start. When I sit down and I've got a database, somebody says, well, you know, our backups are still running, and I get this call every time, like 2 or 3 times a week sometimes we get this call. Our database is still backing up after 6 hours. Well, you know, we've got a few hundred servers. We haven't been able to tune all of our backups yet, right? So we'll get on that server, and this is where I start. If I'm going to sit down and tune a backup, I'll run a backup of that database to the null device to find out how fast, theoretically, I can read data out of that database.
Question.
Yes.
If you do it like that, just backup database to disk, does it record it in does it interrupt the log chain or the backup chain?
Yes. And we're going to talk about that in another class. It's in my notes to talk about it in another class. The question was, if you do a log backup to a null device, does it act like a regular log backup? Yes.
And normal backups.
And normal backups too, right. As far as SQL is concerned, this write happened. It's your fault that it didn't.
You should really just copy it.
If you're going to do this with that, and you've got those concerns, then yes, you should use copy only. Right?
Can you do the backup database to null with copy only?
I don't know why you wouldn't be able to.
Okay.
Yeah, you can. Yeah. Because in preparation for my thing last month, I did that.
Would have behaved the same way.
Yeah. I don't see why it wouldn't. So the only thing copy only does everybody know what copy only is? The only thing copy only does is it doesn't clear the DCM. Okay? Okay, so if we back up to null, we will get our theoretical throughput limit for reading out the database. I don't know how long this will take, probably about, 30 seconds-ish? Whatever the others have taken. Someone sing me a ballad.
What qualifies as a ballad?
Somebody give me a reason to give a book away, man.
You're the greatest, man.
Oh God, that was lame.
Just starting on entry level, I could definitely use a book.
Really?
Looking forward.
Come get one.
It's that easy.
What's coming up tomorrow night on the night?
Oh, yes, I do have an idea. Hold on, I'll tell you in a minute. Yeah.
So just starting out.
I am, who am I hosting with now? I am hosting with SQL Server Mart.
I have a question. What is a good test for a good backup?
What do you mean, what is a good test for a good backup?
Because the reason I'm saying I've done tons of backups in big databases, and they were being vaulted somewhere, but there was never a test for restore. Yeah, and I said, what good is this?
So let me see if I understand the question. What is a good way to test restores?
No. What is a test for a good one? But restore is a good test for the backup. You answered that already.
He asked what's a good way to test a backup? I said, I just try to do a restore.
Yeah.
Restore every day.
Because I've been in a situation where I've done backups, but there was no test for
Right.
restore. And
Right.
What was backed up? What was on those devices?
And there are a few phrases that there are a few phrases that DBAs live by, and one of them is you don't have a backup until you have a restore.
Pardon me? I'm sorry.
You don't have a backup until you have a restore.
Well, now, question.
Yeah, that's.
Was he asking about how to test let's say you're doing dumps, how to test the dumps on an ongoing basis so that you can verify?
I don't know if that's what he was asking or not.
I took it that he's never done a restore, that he's done backups, but he's never had to do a restore. So he doesn't know, you got to test the backups in order to know that they're good.
Your back's not.
Okay. Clarify with me if that's not what we were talking about later. Yes.
So can you restore to the null device to read from the backup? I'm just curious. I've never tried.
I don't know how that would even happen. No. From null?
No, to null. So
You don't restore. You don't restore to anything. You restore from something. So, to isn't even a keyword you can use with restore.
Well, you restore database, so you're.
But you can't restore null. That's not even an option. No.
Restore database X to is equal or just move file whatever to null.
Oh man, we're really reaching now. I don't know. You test that and send that out to the group.
It does a path check. When you do a restore with move, it does a path check.
Yeah. And null will probably blow up the path check. Good call.
Isn't there a restore verify only so it doesn't have to?
Yeah.
That doesn't do
Yeah, but that's not going to give you a speed test on your restore. So, okay. We've got our max throughput here, right? My max throughput is, in this case, 30 megs a second. That's what I hope to achieve with my backups. Okay? So the next thing I do is I start testing it with different buffer counts. Once I get what I'm calling a sweet spot with buffer counts, and yes.
Would there be any trace flags that you'd want to have on so that you could determine, well, this is backup with a null device, buffers was it using, and so on?
Yeah, you could use 3004 to determine the buffers and whatnot that it was using, absolutely. If you're that concerned with that, then just add buffer count to your line anyway, right? But if you're just curious as to what it's doing by default, then sure, yeah, run it with buffers only if it's the same number of files that you have, same number of devices that you have in your regular backups, right? If you're pushing your regular backups with 10 files and you're going to do you're going to do it to one null device, right? That's not going to be apples to apples, right? So now I'm still playing with null here, right? So I'm playing with null, and now I'm going to increase the buffer count to 25.
That's what she said.
So come up with a better one. You're on the right track. That's what she said. So now, once I get that down and I find the sweet spot with my I/O, my memory, my CPU, right? Then I can start moving on to physical files. Okay. Now, there's still some work to be done in the physical files, but the question comes up quite often. I think it came up last time. How do I know what my sweet spot is?
That's what she said.
That one's worth a book. So How do you know what my sweet spot is?
I typed it in.
Oh, fair enough. Okay, now has anybody read ahead and know how to find out what the sweet spot is? So when I'm here, let me.
One or both.
Just one. Jeez, dude.
Well,
They're identical, I think.
okay. I wasn't certain.
They're identical, and it's an exam. It's an exam voucher and a prep. It seems as though the voucher is missing out of this one, or somebody.
That's why I asked if they were the same.
Yeah, well, there was a voucher in there. Is there a voucher on the floor down there? People have been messing with them.
That's what she said.
So let me see. Was that on?
So you do the memory before you do the file?
Yes, you do the memory before you do the files because you have to know what your theoretical throughput is first, right? I thought I had a backup class folder here. Does anybody see the backup class folder? I'm just blind. No. But I do have one here. I don't know if my perfmon is. Ah, there you go. So I've got my perfmon thing here. I said I have my perfmon thing here. There we go. Okay, so I've got a few counters here that I like to monitor. Now, going back here for a sec, let's close this out. We're done with that. Going back here for a sec, you'll see here that it says disk read bytes per second and average disk seconds per read. And that's how that's read, is average disk seconds per read. So how fast you're reading the disk is this first one, and your latency is the second one. Okay? So you're going to reach your theoretical limit at a couple different points. When you get, I'll say at 100% CPU. Okay, so let's talk theoretical points first, right? And then we'll bump it back down to practical points. When you reach 100% CPU, you've reached your theoretical CPU limit, right? Your backups will never get any better than that, okay? When you've reached zero memory, you have reached your theoretical limit. When you're, where is it?
Are we a theoretical?
Well, you know, yes, that's only a theoretical limit, and I'll talk to you about that in a minute. I believe I said that a few seconds ago.
You want to take his book back?
Yeah, give me that book back. When you get into disk read bytes per second and average disk seconds per read, both of these guys. So disk read bytes per second is going to go up and up and up and up and up, and at some point it's going to level off. When that levels off, you've reached your maximum read throughput. And when and I have to look at this because there are so many counters I don't want to get it. And when your average disk seconds per read, which is your latency, right, how long it takes to get from the disk up into the buffer, right, will keep climbing, so the graph is eventually going to look like this, right? When your latency continues and this levels off, you have reached your I/O throughput. You can no longer make it any faster. Now, those are theoretical limits. This is where the problem begins, right? Because there are theoretical limits and there are operational limits. Okay? You do not want to theoretically, or I'll say you don't want to switch to the operational side and say, okay, I managed to get on my test box that's identical to my prod box and get all the stars aligned and all the planets dancing around them and my CPU at 100% and my I/O maxed out, and now I'm going to go put that on my prod box. Woohoo! Right?
It follows up your rental back.
Exactly. There are operational limits. So what you've got to do, and this is where it becomes more of a trial and error sort of thing, right? I've been trial and erroring my backups on some of my boxes at work for a few weeks, right? You run it for a couple weeks, maybe a month. Take some counters, see if anybody complains during backup times, right? That's the biggest indication that something's wrong is when the backups kick off about 10 minutes later, the phone and email starts lighting up, right? Okay, I think I overcommitted my resources just a little bit. So that's how to tell your theoretical limits. Your operational limits, I can't really help you with. You're going to have to play with that on your own. Look at the CPU that your box usually runs at. if your CPU, if your box normally runs at about 30% CPU, your backups take it up to like 90. Well, okay, I mean, if it's only for 10 or 15 or 20 minutes, I'm all for getting it backed up really fast, right? Really? Nothing? Okay, there you go. But if it takes it up higher, I mean, if you're backing up in 10 or 15 minutes or 20 minutes and you've got a huge database and you're only going from 30% to like 55%, dude, you're golden, right? I mean, that's plenty of workload to spare in there. The CPU is not that big a deal. As long as I don't ever like to get into the 90s for any reason at all, right? Even though your managers like it to be up in the 90s, right? We don't. Well, because that's wasted money, right? They like to see CPUs going 100% 24/7 and everything working really well. So CPU isn't your problem. Your problem is going to be max transfer size. That is your biggest, I want to say, hindrance to your tuning effort. The default max transfer size for anything that's not SQL Express is going to be 1 meg, and that's how big of contiguous chunks it reads and writes from the database at once. So from the database to the file, it's going to write in 1 meg chunks by default if you are on anything other than Express, and Express is 64K. Okay? So last time you remember I told you that I found one of my sweet spots at 4 megs. I keep wanting to say 4 gigs. Oh my God. At 4 megs. That's only for one server. I've got plenty of servers that I'm leaving at the default of 1, or some of them are even 2, right? But think about it. You've got to read a 4 meg chunk, a 4 meg contiguous chunk, I'll say, because that's the important part, out of the database and write it to the file. So if your database is severely fragmented, that's going to make that a lot harder, okay? And finding that contiguous space and reading it all at once is going to be the biggest I/O bottleneck you're going to have. So most of the time, I'm going to say stay at 1 and 2 megs, and I'm just dying to say gigs. Don't let me. You're in charge of it. So 1 and 2 megs is where you'll stay most of the time. If you have to go up into 3 and 4, do it judiciously and test it very well, and make sure that you really, really watch it when you put that into production, because your users could complain. My users have been. I haven't changed it yet. I'm making them live with it for now. But, well, they're always asking me if the backup is. They're always asking me if the backups are going every night. Did the backup kick off last night? Did the backup kick off last night? Did the database slow down about 1 o'clock? Yeah, then the backup went off. Every time you experience a little bit of slowness at 1 o'clock, the backup's going, and you can rest easy that we can restore, right? So, stay lower, especially if you start to see that I/O creep up. And when that's going to be really important is in really busy OLTP boxes. DSS boxes, not quite so much, a little bit, but not quite so much. But the randomness of the I/O of OLTP boxes makes it harder to find larger chunks of contiguous I/O, right? So it's better, especially if you're doing all that page splitting and all that stuff, right? All that nasty stuff that goes on inside of an OLTP database, right? So DSS system's not quite as bad, but OLTP, if you've got a really busy OLTP box, keep your I/O smaller at 1 and 2 megs, and you'll get along much better with absolutely everybody involved. You keep looking like you have a question, but you never actually do that. So go ahead.
I always have a dumb look on my face. Is there any good number to set your growth on for a database? So that you're not getting fragmented database files?
The question is there a good number to set your auto growth at?
Right.
I default mine. Now this is up for debate, right? I default mine at 1 gig across the board, no questions asked, and then vary them if I need to. I rarely go over a gig. The big debate is whether it's 500 megs or a gig. Either one is fine. The defaults that SQL comes with, I'm really hoping they change that in the next. Yeah, it's like 1 meg for data files and 10% for log files. Really, and we all know not to do percentages, right? right? Okay, good. So, I've got a beautiful PowerShell that I wrote quite a while ago that goes through my entire environment and changes all the file growth rates to 1 gig. And I run that periodically just to make sure that everything's still on track. A good way to do that is with changing it from model, right? So yeah, absolutely.
Would your backup be helped any if you were to defrag your indexes before you began your index? Especially the cluster.
I want to say probably not much. Maybe a little bit minusculely. That'd be a really good question to ask Paul when he's here next month.
I think Paul did a post about that.
Not that I recall, but that doesn't matter.
I'll see if he's on
Ever
that.
experimented with putting all of your indexes in one file group and then only backing up the primary file group to save on space of your backups?
I have put all of my indexes in a single file group many times. I don't like doing a single file group for all of them anymore because unless I have phenomenal disks for that, then now your index lookups are going to be more expensive because you're creating a hotspot on that partition, right? But I have never done it to save backup because indexes change and you're going to corrupt a database if you do something like that.
I read an article, I think it was on SQL blog, where he talked about doing that, and he doesn't care because he restores
He restores and then rebuilds all the...
and then recreates all the indexes.
Then that's beautiful for him.
I just wondered if you ever played with it, what you thought.
If you're...
Of course, it adds time to the restore too.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to say. If your restore point can handle that, okay. But it takes 6 hours to reindex my database. That's not acceptable. The little bit extra that's taken up by my indexes, I don't care, right? But I suppose it's a strategy, sure. Okay.
If you restore the database, you are reindexing again the next day, right?
I'm sorry?
Once you drop the database back down, once you restore the database, you're automatically reindexing the next day.
Well, you may not be reindexing all the tables at once every single day, and you reindex some tables one day, and other tables another day, other tables another, and then you run defrags in between and whatnot. So no, I'm not. There's never a time when my database is being reindexed. Yeah, sure. Save the console settings. Okay, so we're slowly running out of time. By slowly, I mean quickly. Okay, sweet spot for reads. And all this stuff we just talked about. I wrote all this stuff down just so that when I post the script file, you guys will have some of the discussion that we put in here. It's useful to know how many buffers you're going to need ahead of time, or how much memory your buffers are going to take up, right? If I want to increase to 500 buffers and so much, how many buffers, how much memory is that going to take up?
Analysis services cubes, backing them up. Can you do that? See, it wasn't a good question. You didn't want to ask because you thought it was a dumb question.
No. The question is, can you back up AS cubes? Yes, you can, but everybody that I've talked to says it's not worth it. It's more worth just rebuilding the cubes than it is to, because you back up the definitions and then the cubes themselves can just be rebuilt. Is that accurate, you AS guys?
There's a long answer, but basically if you're doing full processing, so you're rebuilding the cube from scratch and it's small, then there's no value to it. But if you have partitions and you have data that you haven't touched or data that's gone from your data sources onto the cube, you want to back up.
That's a good point. Yeah. See, I'm not an AS guy, so I'm glad we have these.
And I don't want to.
No, you're fine. So.
But I will give away books in my session if you're looking to get rid of books.
Oh, sure. Well, I'm not having much luck, so
Okay, well,
evidently I'm bringing nothing but crap these days. This ITSIC book and the programming and all that stuff is evidently just out of vogue now. Oh, that's so last year.
Do you have any replication books?
Not on me. I'm sorry? Yeah, I got a T-SQL book. Do you want it? Come get it. Okay, so buffer count times max transfer size. Since max transfer size is in bytes, if you multiply that by the number of buffers, then it will give you the amount of bytes that of memory that you're going to use for your backup operation. I know I had something else to say, and with all of this SAS talk and stuff, it's gone right out of my head.
Can I let you know at the end of the class which I'm getting?
Oh, I see. Oh, that's right. You like to look through books and make sure it's worth it first. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I don't know.
Let's see. So since I can't remember what else I was... Oh, I remember now. The buffers come out of the non-page. Come out of the non-buffer pool part of SQL's VAS, which is its virtual address space, right? In 32-bit systems, you have to be really careful, and I've still got plenty of 32-bit systems lying around, right? The mem to leave area that we're talking about here is 256K, not 256K, 256 megs. Hey, at least I didn't say gigs, huh? It's 256 megs by default, and that's also where your connection memory comes out of, and your linked servers and your XPs and all of that good stuff comes out of that same really tiny area, right? So just know that on 32-bit systems, you've got 256 megs. You got half a gig to play with. If you want to change that, you can start up SQL with the -G switch, pass it the number of, pass it the amount of memory you want it to save, and then bounce SQL, and then you can. You look very confused.
You said half. You just say 256 meg and half a gig.
Yeah. Yes, I did. Yes, I did. We'll just stick with 256 megs. Half a gig. Half a gig was wrong. That'd be a quarter gig, wouldn't it? So, let's see. What else did I have? Yes. Max transfer size. Why did I mess it up?
No, I just wanted you to repeat it because I was trying to write it down.
Okay, it's right there on the max transfer size is in bytes. If you multiply that times the number of buffers you want to use, so if you're using 4 meg buffers, you multiply that by the 500 buffers that you want to use. I mean, if you're using 4 meg transfer size, you multiply that by the 500 buffers you want to use, and that'll tell you how much memory your backup operation is going to take. Fair enough? Now I'm going to show you one last thing here. This is a real production backup experiment that I say experiment, but a backup tuning session. Took me about 2 or 3 days to get all of this. I've been using this same format since I started doing backup testing in like 2000. And this is the exact same format I turn into vendors when I do private benchmarks for them. And now you look at the last, well, not the last, a couple 3 years ago, the last version of Lightspeed. I think it was 5 that started giving you the test where you can have it test automatically different parameters for you, and it would go through there and it would test different backup parameters and show you which one was the best. And it spits out a report very similar to this, except it's got a graph on top of it and everything. So you see here that I took a single file backup first. This was after I got my null, right, and I knew what my baseline was. It took me 1 hour and 9 minutes and 128 megs a second. And you can just see here I record the number of files and number of buffers, then max transfer size when I change something I add it to the thing, and you can see all the way down here how my megs per second is crawling up and up and up and up. Now I know I've got a disk I/O bottleneck for my writes, okay? I've seen it in Perfmon, and I know I'm on tier 3 storage, and my theoretical sweet spot is 650 megs a second. I am at 558. That's not too bad, considering I'm on tier 3 storage, on tier 3 shared storage, okay? So what can you do to increase your I/O throughput? The same thing that you can do to increase it for all your database stuff. By default, you'll run with more buffers if you increase the amount of physical files that your database has. So if you split your database up into different file groups, spread stuff out on different files, you'll automatically start off with more buffers. More buffers is probably the biggest improvement you could make right out of the gate. More buffers and more files, right? So the more buffers you have, the more files you have in your database, the more concurrent reads you've got going on, and the faster your database is going to back up. So, and that goes the same thing. Even if you've got one database file and you've got multiple backup files, it's still going to help tremendously, right? But if you have multiples and multiples, come on, nobody?
Everybody, if you want to limit the amount of CPUs you want to assign to your backup.
Right. So the question is, what if you want to limit the number of CPUs you want to assign to the backups? There are two ways you can do that. First of all is you can set the global max DOP and SP configure, right? And the second one is resource governor. But normal resource governor rules apply. But there is no way to say backup database with max DOP 2. You can't actually say, give me 2 CPUs, but you can give it a percentage of the CPUs on the box. And if you don't have too many resource pools in there, then you'll get pretty close to what you asked for. The more resource pools that you have in there, the more the math gets funky and you end up with something that you didn't expect.
Does your backup speed really correlate to your restore speed?
Question is, does the backup speed really correlate to the restore speed? No, not really.
Theoretically, you're still going to be about so many minutes in your restore time.
Yeah, well, you tune your restores just as well as you do your backups, right? But just the fact that you always have to zero out the log file means it's going to be slower than a backup. How tightly you control your logs is one thing, right? But since you always have to zero that, then yeah, it's always going to be slower. In my experience, restore is always a little slower than backups no matter what you do.
Is it because of the read and write difference?
Right. So some other things you can do to increase your I/O, right? You can put it on faster disks. Like I said, I'm trying to get mine from Tier 3 onto Tier 1. You can dedicate an HBA. You can absolutely do that. If you're on a shared HBA now and you really, really need the fastest backups possible, you put that on Tier 1, you give it a dedicated HBA, dude, you can't go wrong, right? Nothing contending with it. It's only going to be used for a short time during the day, but if fast backups and fast restores are that important to this one application, it's going to be worth it. You can change the RAID level, right?
Or you use solid state drive like a basic disk.
Or you could go to solid state, right? But going to SSD is the first thing I said. You can upgrade your drives. So yeah, it's expensive, but then again, if it is that important to that application, dude, it is what it is, right? If you honestly have to have it backed up really fast and restored really fast, no cost is too great, right?
Really, it's what is the business problem you're trying to solve? If
Right.
you've got to get it done in a short period of time, then
Yeah.
they're going to come up with the scratch to
Yeah,
get it done
absolutely.
in that time.
And you're going to find that every single time they say, I need a 5-minute recovery time. Okay, 5-minute recovery time is going to cost you this much. How much will 30 minutes cost me? Right? I mean, that's just the way it always goes, right? That's just the nature of the beast. They always want something until they get the price tag, right? So, anyway, change the RAID level. Go from, quite often I see, yeah, well, you don't want to do that. He said RAID 0. No, you don't want to do that. And quite often I see backups going to RAID 5. That's very common. And 5 is horrible for writes, right? If you say in an OLTP database, the general rule of thumb is anything under 30% writes, you can use RAID 5 for, and anything at 30% and above, it's a generalization, right? It's a good place to start. But we'll say anything at 30% and above, you want to get off of RAID 5 and go to something like RAID 10, right? Well, backups are 100% write, guys, right? Or 100% read, whichever. But most of the time, it's going to be 100% write. Hopefully, you don't restore nearly as much as you back up, So why would you do it on RAID 5? That's 100%. That's 70% over the rule of thumb. That's unacceptable. Do something else, right? RAID 0, horrible idea, right? The right mishap, and I haven't had this mishap on a RAID 0, but I'm really glad I didn't. The right power surge can take out that drive and another piece of the box at the same time, and now you've taken out one of your data drives and your backup drive at the same time. Yeah, so you're shaking your head. You've done this. So the right power surge can completely hose your backups and your database. Do not use RAID 0. Yes, it's fast. RAID 10 is even faster. RAID 10 is beautiful, right? RAID 10 is your friend. It's beautiful for reads. It's beautiful for writes. You can adjust the caching on that HBA, right? Most of the time, you're going to be doing writes. So put that thing to 100% write cache or 90% write cache and just blow that out of the water, right? Why not? Unless you're one of those lucky people that has a 2.5, 4.5 terabyte database that you back up every day, and you also have a whole dedicated set of drives over here that you get to test or restore to every day to make sure that your backup's okay. Unless you're one of those lucky people, you're almost never going to restore, so make it 90% write cache and just blow it out of the water. I say 90% because that one time that you do it, you're going to want some kind of read cache on there, right?
Could you define RAID 10 for those who don't know?
RAID 10 is a striped mirror.
So it's RAID 0 and 1?
Yes, or 1 and 0. It means two things. Yes. And I believe I'm 5 minutes over, so I need to shut up. That's all I got.
That's what she said.
Come on, guys, this is for the internet. Let's go. I'm going to stop this recording.